Today I'm going to read a few Christmas stories, two Christmas stories that come from True Christmas Stories from the Heart of Appalachia. It was compiled and edited by James M. Gifford, Judith F. Kidwell, and Wayne Onkst. This is what the book looks like here. "1900, Christmas in the Country Store." This was by Thomas D. Clark. Once each year, the Southern Country Store took on a delightfully new appearance and a fresh, exciting aroma. New boxes, bales, barrels, and sacks obstructed the passageways and overflowed onto the shelves and counters. This seasonal addition of new stock was even permitted to break into the holy circle about the stove. A general assortment of holiday goods was superimposed over and around the regular stock. Barrels and boxes of candy were rolled in between the sugar, coffee, meal, and flour, or put down on the countertops among the thread and knife cases. Bags of coconut were ripped open and the tops of the sacks rolled down, displaying their fuzzy brown wares awaiting purchase by the cake makers. Boxes of oranges were opened and leaned end up against the counters. Barrels of apples were distributed among the nail kegs and benches about the stove circle. Toys were suspended from the ceiling among the lanterns, water buckets, horse collars, buggy whips, and lard cans, or they were mixed in with the everyday merchandise of the glass cases. On top of the counters were small wooden boxes lined with red paper and filled with sawdust and shavings, and the contents were ruffled into a seductive state of confusion. These contained the firecrackers, torpedoes, and Roman candles. Above the commonplace everyday odors of the store, there was a change. There was a much stronger overtone of cheese. Oranges and apples gave a richness. Burned powder from fireworks added an acrid flavor. And above all of this was the fragrant bouquet of bourbon or the raw tang of corn whiskey. Newly opened tubs of corned mackerel sat well back out of range of careless tobacco chewers. Here was an assortment of merchandise and rich smells which made indelible impressions on several generations of Southerners and which are to many even yet a reminder of Christmas. Clarence Nixon wrote of his father's store in his book, Possum Trot. "We stocked up with fruit in December, and I still think of Christmas when I smell oranges in the country." Christmas was a time of family rededication and a season of easing old and irritating scars of discord. It was a period for visiting and feasting. Celebration of the holiday was the one institution which came through the Civil War unchanged. Until 1915, rural observance was uncontaminated by commercialism. Simple gifts were passed around, and these, as a matter of course, came from the country store. Thousands of country children were happier waking up in a cold farmhouse on Christmas morning because Santa Claus had not forgotten the firecrackers and Roman candles. By December, crops were gathered, and it was safe to set the woods and fields afire. For a whole week during the Christmas season, hillbilly and cane-cutter rabbits lived in misery. Christmas Day was the big day of the season of hunting. Sage fields and heavily wooded bottomlands rang out with the constant firing of hard-kicking breech-loaders. Scarcely a Southern community got through the season without some type of casualty. Occasionally accidents were slight. Sometimes they were the result of an irresponsible pranksters forgetting that shot and powder were wholly devoid of a sense of humor. There were, however, unhappy tragedies which caused many Southern families to bemoan Christmas Day for many years. Persons were killed or maimed with unhappy regularity in the big hunting sprees. Livestock was killed and fences and buildings destroyed. Yet these big hunting parties were as characteristic of the holiday season as were coconut cakes, apples, oranges, and raisins. Seldom was there a public Christmas entertainment in the rural South at which there was no altercations and where cheap country store pistols did not play an insidious part. Under the law of all the states, it was illegal to carry concealed weapons, but these laws were universally ignored. Southern backwoodsmen galloped home from their best girls' houses at Christmas time, firing pistols with wild abandon. So common was this practice in some southern communities that the erratic firing of a pistol by a single man was a sure sign of two things. He had either broken up with his girl or he was going to get married right away. Fruits and nuts were items of real luxury for the Southerner, and they were purchased only in the spending orgies of Christmas time. Oranges and apples in the extreme southern states were rarities, yet they were both produced on the periphery of the region. Oranges at some time or another became an inseparable part of the general history of Christmas, and especially was this true in the South. By the 1870s, the account books of country stores showed that oranges were bought generally, but it is doubtful that many people knew anything about the history of their production. They perhaps believed that oranges could be bought only at Christmas time because merchants never displayed them at any other season. Families bought a dozen oranges and felt that they were well supplied. Children awoke on Christmas morning to find a golden ball in each stocking and to discover that Santa Claus, in a generous mood, had left an additional half-dozen by the fireside. Although for the most part anything which went into a stocking was by a type of domestic common law the individual property of the child receiving it, oranges were an exception. These were common property and were eaten by the family, in many instances, one at a time. Mother usually stripped off the peeling and passed the fruit around in segments. Every part of the orange was saved. Peelings were carefully preserved to be used throughout the year as flavoring for cakes, custards, and puddings. Nuts, raisins, and striped peppermint stick candy were common items in a great majority of the December accounts. Raisins had a special appeal, and many a farm child pulled down brown bunches of these delicacies out of his stocking with more excitement than he showed for new toys. Stores bought candy by the barrel and sold it pound by pound at a very good profit. By the end of the 19th century, when the days of McKinley prosperity had changed somewhat the financial situation of the country, confectioners began placing a varied assortment of fancy piece candy on the country store market, which sold at a higher price and for a fancier profit. There were many other Christmas purchases mixed in with the standard entries. Coconuts formed a vital part of Christmas cooking. A 10-cent coconut placed a distinct emphasis upon Christmas feasting. In fact, next to fresh oysters, it gave real distinction to the Christmas dinner. Opening coconuts was a real adventure for rural Southerners. First, there was the sport of punching in the soft eyes in order to drain off the richly flavored milk, which was a much better drink than spring water. Then there was the business of cracking the hull and extracting the crust of meat. Often great care was taken not to smash the hull into bits when sawing open the nuts. The lower half of the shell made an excellent bowl for a dipper, and many families of limited resources went through the year drinking water from a dipper made by mounting half of a coconut shell on the end of a strong wooden handle. Long hours were spent rubbing hunks of the meat of coconut over coarse homemade graters. The results, however, were nearly always satisfying. It was with a spirit of genuine triumph that Southern women placed before their families thick, rich coconut cakes. This was almost sufficient achievement to make a full Christmas celebration within itself. However, fruit cakes were rivals of the huge cakes which were heavily frosted with the meat of the coconut. The Christmas trade was not only a matter of doing a profitable business in fancy groceries, toys, and gifts, but it was also a matter of buying a large variety of farm produce. Women folk saved eggs for weeks to provide funds for holiday shopping. Closely associated with the celebration of Christmas in Southern farmhouses were the community Christmas trees and parties. These were given primarily for courting couples, but they afforded equally as much pleasure for children and older people. Schoolyards and church grounds were crowded with buggies, wagons, and saddle horses, while inside, half-drunken community wits dressed in flimsy red suits and shabby cotton whiskers carried on a stream of humorous banter as they handed down presents from bespangled holly and cedar trees. Gifts off a country Christmas tree were curiosities indeed. A favorite present for girls was plush-bound photograph albums and memory books. Many young women filled them with family photographs, bits of hair, stray pieces of cloth, pressed leaves, poetic clippings from newspaper and magazines, and personal notes. For the merchants, these items yielded a good profit, and many times generous orders for them appeared in the store invoices. A long list of cut and molded glassware was sold to the Christmas trade. Most common of all the vases were the glass flower holders and vases called Bohemian and alabaster. There were butter dishes with quaint glass covers, glass hats, slippers, compotes, pickle dishes, and large, round-cut glass berry bowls. These pieces were sold by the barrelful, and scarcely a household, including the humblest cabin, was without some of them. Most practical of all was the covered butter dish, which helped in a day of patent fly-minders and peach tree limb shakers to ensure some degree of momentary sanitation for the high cakes of hand-molded butter. Sentimentality for Christmas historically spilled over into affection for the stores themselves. For the countryman, the store at Christmas time was literally a meeting place of stark everyday reality with a fantastic world of temporary but pleasant escape. And that was an excerpt from A Little Bit of Christmas in Appalachian Christmas Stories, published by the Jessie Stewart Foundation in 1997. What a great peek back at the Christmas there, the way things used to be. Some interesting to me that many of those little bits and pieces that was mentioned are still observed today, although maybe less so and maybe in a different way. I wrote down a couple of things to talk about, but I wanted to go back. I like this part. By December, crops were gathered and it was safe to set the woods and the fields afire. Pap told me when he was a boy, he didn't necessarily say that it happened at Christmas, but when he was a boy, that was just standard practice. Every year they burned off the garden areas and the woods, though, even the woods, and they did that to keep brush down, the understory, to keep it down, and to encourage new growth of the grasses, coming up for the animals to eat, thinking about the grazing animals. So that was just common practice. Of course, eventually what happened is that as Pap would say, the settlements got too full of people, and you couldn't do that for fear of burning somebody's house down, where there are outbuildings or whatever. But so that was interesting that they mentioned that they did that at Christmas. Also, of course, the things that I was thinking about that are still observed today, at least in my family and in my area, are the oranges. Oranges are still just synonymous with Christmas. Granny always had oranges, and I'm sure Granny Gazzy did too when Granny was a girl, if she could afford them and if she could find them. Of course, today they're readily available, so we always try to have oranges. They're just part of Christmas, and I don't buy oranges any other time of the year. Not really that I can think of that I do. I do see them other times of the year. Maybe there might be an odd time that Miss Cindy brought some over, or maybe I've seen one at the produce stand and was tempted by it or something like that, but really just Christmas. Coconuts, those wonderful coconut cakes was I'm talking about, those are again synonymous with Christmas in my family. For many years I bought Pap, I would buy him, of course we made Granny made coconut cakes, we made coconut desserts, coconut macaroons, things like that, with just the store-bought coconut that's already shredded. But because Pap had those wonderful memories, for many years I'd buy him a coconut for Christmas and give it to him for Christmas. And he would, drink the milk out of it, and he would get Granny to make something out of the meat, or we'd just eat it. It was great. And the other thing still common, I still hear sometimes on Christmas and Christmas Eve, is those firecrackers and the guns shooting off. Now, nobody, like they were talking about, nobody shooting them off to the point that somebody might be injured, much safer than that. But it's still a way of welcoming in the Christmas holidays. And Interesting that that's passed down through the generations here in the mountains of Appalachia. And I forgot to say that part that I read was most likely Kentucky, where they were talking about. At the beginning of this book, it tells that most of the stuff in here, almost all of it, comes from Kentucky, all of the memories and all the stories. So that probably was where it come from. But that tradition still passed down of the firecrackers. You'll often hear people, older people, say they identified Christmas like it's firecrackers. Today we think of 4th of July with firecrackers, but it was Christmas. Christmas was what they connected firecrackers to when they were growing up. So that's interesting. Those memory books that it mentioned, that it was a real big seller, you know, as they look back through the ledgers of country stores, that was a big seller for girls. I can understand that. When I was a young girl, I liked to have books like that and write stuff and paste stuff in it, so I can understand that. And one year for Christmas, I can't even remember how I found them. The girls and my niece April was maybe about 14 or 15 or something like that. And I bought them these books. I want to say they were called slam books. I don't know if that's right, though. I should have asked the girls before I started this video. But it was basically a scrapbook. And it come with these, you know, neat little stickers and little pens to write with, and some of the pages had lines and some of them didn't, and it was just this whole little, you could order different things, different kind of little stickers and stuff to go with it, and I got that for April and Corey and Katie for Christmas, and they all just really loved it. I bet maybe they've still got them somewhere, maybe they do. They were really enthralled with writing in them and putting stuff in them for a long time. So I want to read another story, but what's about to happen is my battery's about to go dead, I see. So maybe I should just end this one here this week. I was going to read one more, but maybe we'll just do that next week. So I'm going to, just for the next few weeks until Christmas is over, I do have another book picked out for us to read as soon as Christmas is over. But I'm going to continue to read some stories from this book, and I might read something else too. I do have a whole section, a whole playlist of different things I've read at Christmas. Some of them are books, entire books. The Christmas Barn. What was the other? The Homecoming. And is another one. So those are books that would take you several weeks to, you know, well, depending on how often you listen to them. But if you wanted to listen to one a week, it would take you a few weeks to listen to them. So I will link to those in the description below. There's 2 Christmas books, and there's a whole bunch of just real short, some of them no longer than 5 or 10 minutes. So I will link to those too in the description below. And I hope that you'll join me next Friday, and we'll read more out of this book, and I'll make sure that my battery is charged.